Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next panel. Should we slow down research on AI? I have the luxury of introducing you to our panelists, Nick Bostrom, who will be joining us remotely, Mark Brakel, Yann LeCun, and Francesca Rossi. So I would like to start off with giving everybody a chance to take an initial position on the original question asked. And since, Nick, you're joining us remotely, why don't we have you take the first position to introduce yourself and your position on whether we should slow down AI research.
Yes, I'm Nick Bostrom. I'm a professor at Oxford. Yeah, my view is complex. I think one can consider sort of the zeroth derivative of the question, which is, should we develop AI? If so, how advanced AI should we develop? I think ultimately as advanced as we possibly can, including radical forms of superintelligence. And then you can consider sort of the first derivative, which is like, how fast should we be moving towards this destination? But you're really asking about the second derivative, like, should we kind of slow down or accelerate? And I think it would be desirable to have the option as we move towards more transformative kinds of AI capabilities to slow down at that stage or even pause for a limited time. If the frontier developers feel that capabilities are running ahead of their ability to control those capabilities, if the alignment problem is not solved by the time we figure out how to make very powerful artificial general intelligence, then it might be necessary to be able to have the option to slow down for a year or two or something like that. I'm a little concerned about scenarios in which we work so hard to create this ability to pause or to slow down that we overshoot and end up in a situation where we get a permafrost in AI, where advanced AI capabilities are never developed. And I think I could see various ways in which that could happen, even though it doesn't at all seem very realistic right now when there is so much progress being made. I still think that is not a scenario that can be completely ruled out. And I think there are significant risks that will be increasing as we move towards more powerful AI systems. And in my previous work, I have tried to draw attention to those. There are, of course, also benefits, including benefits of moving fast. And they are perhaps harder to see. If a self-driving car runs over a pedestrian and kills them, that's a horror. And we read about it in the newspapers. But we don't read about like the 3,500 people who are run over by non-self-driving cars every day and whose lives might be saved if we had made faster progress with AI. So I think there is this kind of invisible cost of slowing AI development that would have to be carefully weighed against the benefits we might gain.
Thank you very much, Nick. Yann, would love to hear your perspective.
The short answer is no, we shouldn't slow down. But there is, a more complex issue, of course, behind this. And I want to use an analogy. It's been the case in the past that we've developed technology and we've taken some time to deploy it because we couldn't make it safe quickly enough. The example I use all the time is turbojet technology, right? So turbojets were invented in the 1930s. First deployed in the 1940s for military applications, and only deployed for passenger transportation in the 50s, and sort of generalized really in the late 50s and early 60s. And the reason for that is we couldn't make it safe and economical before that. And so the idea that somehow we're going to deploy technology before it's safe is false. I mean, there's a lot of mechanisms in society to prevent the deployment of technology that is dangerous simply because it's not economically profitable, right? If you kill people with your technology, like, what business do you have? So I don't think we need to think of AI in different terms. The only reason why some people think about AI in different terms is because they have this idea somehow that at the level of research and development, not at the level of deployment, but at the level of research and development, there could be bad things happening. So somehow a scenario by which, you discover the secret of superintelligence, and you build a machine and you turn it on, and a minute later that machine takes over the world and kills everyone. That scenario is just ridiculous. That just is not happening, ever. First, because the progress in AI is not going to be an event. It's going to be progressive. And we're going to discover techniques that make machines as intelligent as a cat. And by the way, we're nowhere near that today. We have systems that can pass the bar exam, but we don't have domestic robots that can clear up the dinner table and fill up the dishwasher, something that any 10-year-old can learn in a few minutes. So we're nowhere near reaching human-level intelligence, let alone superintelligence. If we're lucky, within a decade or so, maybe 2, we'll reach something like cat-level intelligence or dog-level. Okay, and we'll have some time to kind of fine-tune the system and make sure it's safe and make sure it's being built in the right way. So let's go back to the example of turbojets. Asking today that future AI systems that we don't know how to build be safe is like asking in 1920 that transatlantic flight at near the speed of sound be safe. Like, we didn't even, the technology was not invented yet. There was no way we could even imagine how to make it safe. And in fact, it took us decades to make it safe. It's only in the last few years that you can cross the Atlantic on a 2-engine airplane. Before that, it was required the airplanes were required to have 2 or 3 engines because turbojets were not deemed to be safe enough. So, I mean, we have all kinds of mechanisms for that. We built prototypes of nuclear-powered cars in the 1950s. And they were never commercialized because there was no way to make it safe. There were prototypes of nuclear-powered rockets. Again, they were never deployed because there was no way to make this safe for the same reason. So the idea somehow that AI is different is false. It's just like the rest of technology.
Thank you. Francesca, can we get your point of view, please?
Okay, my answer is also no. And I agree with Yann that there is a difference between research and deployment and use. And I think the focus should be on the use more than the research. But also for the reason that research itself and the advancement done by researchers are not going to, and not just in the future, but even now, are not just improving the capabilities of AI, but are also improving our ability to mitigate its risks. So there are all this work about fairness in AI, how to detect it, how to mitigate it, and how to detect and mitigate hallucinations, So research itself is not just, maybe there is a wrong perception that research is just aimed at building more powerful and who cares about the safety models. No. Research is also about, if you go to the main AI conferences, a large part of the papers are about tools and techniques to address the risks of AI. So, of course, the research has to be that kind of research, very multidisciplinary, very, but more and more is being like that. So that's why I think that research itself is a tool to mitigate and the risk of AI. But the second thing is that there are some a problem of focus to me in thinking about slowing down AI research. So one is the focus on research rather than deployment and use, which is where the danger may be. Second one is the focus, I think, on the misuses of the technology. Say, we can generate, very powerful AI systems, and then some bad actors may use it in a bad way, because of these powerful capabilities. But this, to me, is a less, to me, concerning issue, because I think that society in itself will take care of this issue, than other issues that instead are present and which this proposal, let's say, to slow down AI research does not focus on, which instead are the ones that we need to focus on, which are, again, the fairness, the explainability, the provenance, the hallucination, the reasoning, and all those things, which to me are, the spreading of misinformation, are more concerning than the possible risk of misuse. Also, it focuses on the future AI systems, which I don't think that the danger and the risks of is just in the future AI system, which are more powerful than GPT-4 or above a certain number of flops, like I see in some regulation in US and in Europe. But the risk in some AI systems of being misused or be used for wrong things is already with the current systems. So we need to focus on what we can do now. Also because then, if we know well how to address the risk of current AI, uses of current AI systems, we can be in the best position to also address then the risk of the future more powerful ones. And then, of course, the advancement of research. We have to remember that AI, in its whole history, from rule-based systems to machine learning to deep learning to generative AI, has brought a lot of beneficial opportunities in individuals' life, in our personal well-being, in societies, in companies. So we have to remember that the advancement of research in AI, with all the waves, has really brought a lot of benefits.
Thank you. And what would a debate be if we all agreed? So, Mark, would love to hear your perspective.
Thank you, Lisa. My name is Mark Brakel. I'm the Director of Policy at the Future of Life Institute. And up to last year, I would have said you might know us from the Asilomar AI principles, but now we're mainly known as the letter people that put out the letter in March calling for a pause in development of AI systems more powerful than GPT-4. I'd love to start with a question. I'd ask you all to raise your hand if you agree with my statement, and then if you could raise your hand if you disagree with my statement. If you support human cloning, could you please raise your hand? And if you're against human cloning, could you please raise your hand?
For those that are not in the room, there's a lot more hands raised right now.
I wanted to ask this to show that we have, as a society, chosen to pause or slow down certain research and development. And I think it's sometimes hard for people who work in AI only to think of that. But if we look at other fields, like human cloning as part of a field of biology, we have made that decision. So I wanted to establish that at the beginning to make sure that we're all on the same page as that this might be possible. Now, I agree with my fellow panelists that there's lots of AI research that we definitely need. I think all of the benefits that Francesca talked about, personalized tuition, self-driving cars, medicine, but also fundamental AI research is really, really important. But what I would argue is that we need to redirect our research away from reckless scaling. We need to be quite frank about the risks. 28 countries back in November, including France, the United States, China, all the major powers, said and recognized that there is risks of misuse, yes, but also risks of loss of control. And many people, I think, sometimes struggle to conceptualize this issue of loss of control. What does it really mean? But if we look to social media, it's not that difficult. Because in social media, developers gave the social media algorithm a goal, namely maximize engagement, maximize the time you spend on Instagram, and the unintended side effects have been quite significant. There is now widely documented mental health issues amongst women and girls, but also some of the political polarization with the storming of the Capitol or the storming of the government institutions in Brasilia were partly induced by that goal given to a social media algorithm. And that's a super simple AI system. So if we build more and more AI systems and we scale recklessly without understanding how these AI systems work, we are running a real risk. And I think it's that type of research, it's that type of research and development in just scaling without understanding what we're doing that I think we need to redirect away from. We need to speed up most research, but I think we need to be careful about that type of research. Just like we don't allow human cloning, we don't allow genetic modification of people, we don't allow open source nuclear research, we should also be very careful about that type of reckless scaling.
Thank you, Mark. Would you like to respond, Francesca?
Yes. I mean, these examples, of course, are very, people say, oh my God, no, human cloning, no. But I think that human cloning cannot be made an analogy between human cloning and AI. AI is a science and a technology. Human cloning is an application of science. The same is with social media. Social platform is not an AI system. I mean, Yann, you may tell me better than me, but in my view, it's a platform supported by AI to do whatever it wants to do. Now, what I'm saying is that AI can be used in many different ways, and again, these are two examples of uses of AI, not research in AI or AI systems with certain capabilities or certain limitations or certain risks. So let's not confuse. For example, sometimes people make also another analogy between AI and nuclear weapons. And that's a very wrong analogy in my view, because nuclear weapons, again, are one specific application of a kind of technology. But AI is not like that. AI is a basic technology that can be used in many different ways. People talk about dual use to mean that it may be used in many different ways. So we have to be careful about this analogy because, of course, they can be very frightening, but they need to have the basic elements to be really real analogies that make sense.
Yeah, I very much agree with Francesca. AI is a technology that's basically designed to make people smarter, whereas nuclear weapon is designed to wipe out entire cities. I mean, I think the analogy is ridiculous, frankly. They have opposite goals. Now, every powerful technology can be used for good or bad. It's true of, I don't know, a kitchen knife or whatever, or turbojets for that matter, as I was talking about earlier. So the question is, are we better off with or without the technology? It's not whether the technology is intrinsically dangerous or not. Are we better off with or without? That's the first point. Second point, the type of effect. So I very much agree with Francesca that there is nothing wrong with regulating deployment and products and applications. We're discussing regulating R&D. And indeed, human cloning is an application. Indeed, nuclear weapons is an application. And social network is also an application. The social network you're describing are 10 years old. They're from 2014. Today's social network, at least at Meta, do not work the way you describe. They use relatively simple machine learning techniques. I would be hesitant to actually call this AI, really. I mean, the ranking algorithms, etc. There's massive use of AI for content moderation. So things like taking down pedophilia, terrorist propaganda, hate speech, all that kind of content. That uses AI. AI in this case is not the problem. It's actually the solution to those problems. To give you a concrete number, the proportion of hate speech that was taken down automatically by AI systems worldwide on Facebook at the end of 2017 was on the order of 23%. At the end of 2022, 5 years later, it was 96%. And the reason for the difference is that AI made a huge amount of progress. Now we have AI systems that are trained self-supervised in every language in the world, and we can fine-tune them to detect hate speech in every language with a small amount of data. And so AI is a solution there. It's not the problem. If you think that the ranking algorithms are the problem, this is not AI. It's basically a two-layer neural net, or until recently it was logistic regression. That's not AI. Now, the idea that somehow polarization is increased by social networks, Facebook in particular, or addiction or things like this. Serious studies in social science that actually study those questions basically are very complicated. There is answers for, there is answer against. These answers, it's really not clear. And most of those studies study social networks as they were in 2015-16, not that they are today. There's been, as I said, a huge amount of progress. So, yeah, I mean, you deploy something, you see an effect. If the effect is bad, you correct it, which is what basically Facebook has been doing. But it's not intrinsic to the technology. It's something that you see a problem, you fix it. Most of the activity that AI researchers work on, which is something you just said in your intro. Most people are working on better AI because better AI is safer AI. You know, you don't work on AI safety. You work on better AI, and better AI is just safer because it works better. It's more reliable. The same way, most people who work on turbojet design work on safer turbojet design. That's the only thing they care about. How do you make them, you know, more economical, but also much safer, so you can, you know, fly halfway around the world on a flight of 16 hours with only a 2-engine airplane. You can do this now. It's because people work on safety and reliability when they develop and deploy products. That's the main thing they worry about. It's true for AI as well.
Can I respond for the pro side?
Please do.
I mean, I think some of our disagreement is about whether intelligence as a technology, artificial intelligence, is something different than maybe some other technologies that we've found. Because I think everything we see around us, whether this building, whether the city of Cannes, whether sort of any system, is a product of our intelligence. And I think that's why people who are concerned, like ourselves, see this as slightly different maybe than a technology such as kitchen knives. I mean, I think there is a couple of arguments that you mentioned, and I want to unpick three. One thing you mentioned is that AI progress is gradual, and that because it's gradual, we can see it coming. And you might be right, and I think that would be great if you are. But there are examples of technological breakthroughs that weren't so gradual. So I think the classic example is the splitting of the atom and the discovering of nuclear energy, where Lord Rutherford gave a big speech in London, said this was completely impossible, and the next day this Hungarian physicist reads an article about this and discovers the breakthrough that immediately leads to that technological breakthrough of nuclear energy. So the progress of AI might be gradual, we might know what's coming, but it could also be really sudden, and if so, I think we need to be prepared. The other argument that you talked about is sort of how AI isn't even at cat level, and it isn't at cat level. And so how can it possibly get to human level very, very quickly? But we could fly in a jet plane a lot earlier, before we knew how birds flew. So we may not have to get to the cat stage to be able to get to human level on many, many tasks. So I think the cat to human analogy doesn't always work. And then finally, I think a core message that you gave is that we won't do anything that's not safe. And again, I mean, I really wish that were true, but we have developed nuclear bombs. We've also detonated them. During the Cuba crisis, we came very close to destroying the entire world. So I think we can't trust all humans not to misuse technology when it is this powerful or when it's potentially this powerful.
I think that's a great lead into our next question. So Nick, I'm going to orient this towards you, and then I'm going to open it up to the panel for your perspectives on it as well. So given the potential risks that we've talked about in some of these advanced technologies, what specific safeguards or guidelines would you propose to ensure that we're applying this technology responsibly for research? And if you could include any thoughts on the risk scoring capabilities in the AI Act, that would be also interesting for us to think through in terms of regulation.
Yeah, I think we have to divide and conquer in our analysis of this, because there are so many different issues and concerns with AI that one really needs to break them apart and then address different ones separately. I think the general heuristic that we develop new technologies and then we see different ways they are applied, and if there is a problem, then afterwards we go in and fix them with some regulation, is good in most domains. Where the potential downside is sufficiently limited that we can tolerate a few mishaps happening. So with cars, we find sometimes they crash, and so we invent seat belts and we invent traffic lights, and we gradually increment ourselves to better road safety. I think there is a small subset of risks that this approach will not work for, existential risks, ones where the potential downside that one is concerned about is a complete destruction of this very system for self-correction, either causing the extinction of the human species or some other radical lock-in in some very suboptimal state. When there are existential risks, then we can't adopt this approach of learning from experience and course correcting. We need to prevent even a single existential catastrophe from happening. And I think that is one of the reasons why some people feel that AI is in a different category than many of these other examples that have been presented. So now, if we do focus on that aspect of AI that might cause existential risks, and there are many others which I'm not meaning to downplay just because I don't mention them, but I don't have time to discuss all the present world different issues that one can point to. But I think there are three broad categories. So there's the loss of control scenario, like the kind of science fiction Terminator variant of that, and more realistic possibilities. And there, I think the concern is not just that we might first develop a system and then make some unwise decision about deployment, but the development process itself might potentially pose these risks as AI systems become more advanced. It might be best compared to gain-of-function research in biology, which does frequently result in lab leaks, and some people think occasionally pandemics have resulted from this. So that's one big category, and that has received a lot of attention. Then another big category is this, possibility that we develop very powerful AI tools that humans then use to do bad things to other humans. And here you might analogize that to nuclear weapons that have presented this risk. It's not that the nuclear weapons accidentally would all go off, but it's that they create sort of incentives for powerful actors to use these and abuse these technologies. So that's the second category of existential risk that we need to address. And then I think there's a third one that has received less attention and that maybe is more outside the Overton window still. But if the first one is AI harms human, the second is humans harm each other using AI tools, I think there is a third one as well, which is humans harm AIs. So as we develop increasingly sophisticated digital minds, I think it's possible that some of those eventually might attain various forms of moral status. They might be sort of human-like, possibly sentient. They might have preferences, conception of self as existing through time, and we will ultimately also need to be concerned with making sure that humans don't mistreat these digital minds that we are constructing. And since the future might have many more of these digital minds than there are like human minds or biological minds, that might also matter a great deal. So I think there would be different sort of precautions and methods and safeguards for each of these three areas. Some are more technical, like the alignment problem, the first one. The last one with digital minds is more like a kind of ethical and awakening and broadening of our sort of sphere of compassion.
Thank you. Is there anyone on the panel that would like to take a different perspective than Nick on that topic?
No, I mean, I agree with the characterization of these risks in various, categories, loss of control, misuse, even the voluntary giving to AI all the important decisions, like in our society, like the so-called sometimes the Wall-E, if you have seen that movie, the Wall-E scenario where, people are just not in charge of their own decisions because they have they think that AI can do the decision much better than them. So they decided to give all the decisions, and then now they are kind of not able to take any decision. No? So that is a voluntary, giving away our control, not because the AI has some strange power, and we cannot control it, but because we don't want to control it, and that can really be impactful in the societal structures, in the democracy, in the elections, in the legal system, everywhere. But anyway, so I agree with the characterization, but I think that in terms of safeguards, again, I would focus more downstream rather than at the level of research, and of course, that means that also, yes, you mentioned the European AI Act is one kind of legislation that started being focused mostly on the uses, so on the saying that there are uses of AI that are very high risk, other uses that are unacceptable risks, and other uses that are more minor risks. And because of this categorization of risk, for high-risk use cases, you have a lot more scrutiny, a lot more obligations in the kind of AI that you deploy in those applications, and in human oversight, and so on. So it started as a use risks based legislation, and lately it's become a bit of a hybrid, because of course with the inclusion of the systems like large language models, and especially those, I think they're called general purpose AI systems in the legislation now, that there is this concept of systemic risk. So systemic risk means the risk now is not associated anymore for those kind of AI systems in their application, but in the model, in the system itself. I mean, it's strange because system, okay, in the technology itself. And that to me is, I'm not sure that's the right approach. I'm not even sure how to define which systems, if any, have some systemic risk. The definition that I mentioned is there, and also in the Biden executive order is based on a certain number of flops, so like operations to train them and to build them, which I personally don't think is the right measure of whether they are dangerous or not, because again, there can be systems that even not reaching that threshold can be very dangerous if you use them in a certain way. So I'm not really, I don't know how to define, but I resent that the regulation is certainly needed for regulating the applications and their risks, but of course regulation cannot be the only solution, so there must be guardrails also coming from other actors. First of all, the companies that build and use AI, so they are building the technology, but also they are providing the technology for applications of other companies and also for their own application, their own uses. So they have to play an important role with risk assessment, governance, red teaming, auditing. So definitely regulation is not the only solution, and companies also have to play their part, as well as all the other societal actors, including each one of us. We use the technology, we use AI in basically everything we do online in our digital life. And so we have to come into a framework of a responsible use, even in our own life, even if we think that we don't have a large impact like a regulator or a company can have.
Thank you.
So I think the focus on things like existential risk, which I've said before, is an imaginary risk of systems that do not exist, is distracting from the real risks, and is actually pushing governments to enact regulations that are counterproductive. So we're not going to get killed by AI anytime soon, all right? If ever. If there is any danger of that happening, we're just not going to develop the technology. And we're certainly not going to deploy it. And the scenario by which, again, we turn on a super intelligent AI system and we all die within minutes is just insane. That's just not how the world works. That's not how technology works. That's not how science works. That's not how society works. I mean, this is just not happening. Right, so now let's talk about the real dangers. There is a future, very soon, where every single one of our interactions, all of us, will be mediated by an AI system, an AI assistant, essentially. We'll be talking to it through our smartphones, through wearable devices of various types, through smart glasses, things of that type, okay? And that means every single one of our information, news, political information, education, scientific information, any question we ask, that will be mediated by our AI assistant. For the same reason that we need a free and diverse press to preserve democracy, we also need free and diverse AI assistants. Because we can't have just a handful of companies on the west coast of the US training systems that basically cater to a single language, a single culture, a single set of values, a single centers of interest. What we need is some sort of platform that allows any community cultural, linguistic, whatever, political, to create their AI assistants to cater to their followers or their users or people of their culture. And so that requires having open source AI platforms so that anyone, India, for example, can decide to fine-tune an open source base model like Llama 2 from Meta so that it is fine-tuned and trained and understands all 22 official languages spoken in India, not mentioning all the hundreds of dialects. Okay? We need a very large diversity of those things to be available if you want to preserve diversity of opinions and cultures and languages and democracy. Now, here's the thing. If you believe that AI is so dangerous that it needs to be under control, you're not going to have open source platforms. And so you're going to save humanity of a risk that does not exist, and you're going to kill democracy in the process. That's just a really, really bad idea. So the future of AI has to go through open platforms. They can be customized, not just for cultures and languages, but also for business applications, where the data you fine-tune the system on is private. You don't want to, tell it to the world. And for that, you need free circulation of foundation models, open source models. Now, one fork in the road in which we are today is that there are regulatory thinking at various levels in the EU, in the UK, and in the US, not so much in Asia, that wants to regulate open source platforms because of the idea that somehow, possibly in the future, it might become too intelligent and be too dangerous, and maybe terrorists will put their hands on it. And that's really, really destructive. If we choose the option of open source model, we might have a future in AI. If we choose the regulation of open source models, because of some imagined danger, we're not going to have beneficial AI. We're not going to have an AI industry, certainly not in Europe, if that's the content of the AI Act. We're not going to have all the benefits that AI can bring. And AI can bring a lot of benefits. As I said, AI really ultimately is there to amplify human intelligence. Now, if you think in history, what are technologies that have amplified intelligence widely in the population? The best one is the printing press. Printing press, enable things in Europe like philosophy, rationalism, literacy. There was no point learning to read before that. And ultimately, democracy, science, the French Revolution, the American Revolution. It changed, it brought down feudalism and brought democracy. I mean, that was kind of a big event, right? AI could bring a new renaissance of the same type. Now, compare this with the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire banned the printing press because it was more difficult to control the population. The dogma was more difficult to control. In fact, it had the same effect in Europe. It created the Protestant movement. And the ban of the printing press in the Ottoman Empire was motivated not just by control of the population, but also for the protection of a corporation, which was the calligraphers. The calligraphers, write those beautiful Arabic things. It was a powerful corporation, essentially, and they wanted to ban the printing press. So the Caliph of Baghdad basically banned it. According to the UAE Minister of AI, this was a major component of the decline of the Muslim world and the Ottoman Empire, which was basically dominating science in the Middle Ages. So we're going to be careful what we're doing. We could, be throwing the baby with the bathwater by being afraid of, false dangers, and in the process, basically killing the best opportunity we have to make progress.
Thank you, Yann. So it's clear that your perspective as an open source model is key to balancing that responsibility for a community. Mark, do you have something to add to that in terms of your perspective?
Yeah, and I come from a Protestant family, so I'm really happy with the printing press. Just wanted to point that out. And I think maybe to start with what I agree with Yann, about. And I think as a Dutchman and you as a Frenchman, I think our European identities might transcend our confidence in US companies, in that I think we don't want to live in a world, or I don't want to live in a world, where we are all dependent on one company or two companies to provide us with these personal AI assistants that Yann LeCun just mentioned are coming, and with which I agree completely. Definitely. I mean, I didn't know your view on chatbots and assistants, but I'm glad we're all sort of here in a European coalition. What I disagree on is that existential risks are an illusion. It's great that you have that certainty. We're not talking about sort of the certainty around existential destruction. We're talking about a potential risk, that there might be a probability that AI leads to an existential disaster. And the claim is often made, and Yann just made it again, that these risks and talking about them distracts from other harms and other risks. But there's been quite a lot of interesting research lately that shows that when people in the media talk about existential risk, there's also a lot more attention for other kinds of biases and harms around AI, and other topics also get discussed. So it's not so much that existential risks discussions suppress discussing other harms. And we can see that in the EU AI Act, but also in the Biden White House Executive Order, which addresses bias in housing and in employment, but it also tries to address existential risk by regulating some of these systems beyond a certain level of computational power. And I'm not employed by the European Commission, even though I'm a European, but I do think the European AI Act is a really great thing, and I think the Biden Executive Order is a really great thing, because it starts to identify a specific, very small subset of systems that might cause problems, those that are incredibly powerful, because we need most AI, and we need most AI to be developed. But I think targeting that specific subset is really great. I think just looking at computational power, I agree with you, is probably not going to be great in the long term. I think we need to develop benchmarks of what AI systems are actually dangerous. But until we have that, I think capping compute and making sure that a certain set of models that go beyond those levels of compute, that use massive amounts of compute and data, are regulated, is really important to slow down this out-of-control race between a number of US companies. Because between open source as a model and US companies in Silicon Valley competing with one another, I think there's a third model which involves the public sector and democracy. I mean, CERN is a really good example of an institution that brings together lots of governments in Geneva to do fundamental physics research. And we can do something similar in AI, where we have research, we work together on research, but we involve governments rather than saying either we open source it for everyone or we leave it to the US private companies. I think there is a third way.
So a very short remark. A lot of those discussions, particularly about existential risk, they mention risk, and they basically make the assumption that progress in AI is some sort of natural phenomenon that we can't stop. Some natural phenomenon for which we don't have any agency. It's like a meteor hitting the Earth, right? There's a risk of a meteor hitting the Earth, and there's not much we can do about it. But AI, we build it. I build it. And my friends. It's not something that just happens. It's not a risk that just happens, that is going to fall on us. It's something that we build. We have agency. We can decide whether to build it or not.
I might trust you, but not all of your friends.
You can trust the community, the scientific community. This is not an individual process done by any single company and any single person. This is not like the lone genius, that suddenly invents AI and turns on the robot that takes over the world. That's not happening. What's happening is an open community that does open research, shares information, tries to do the right thing, and it's in the open. That's the most democratic thing you can imagine. Now, the problem is with companies that do the research in secret. And these are the same companies that are lobbying government to regulate open source AI out of existence by trying to convince governments that there is an existential risk, which doesn't exist. Okay? There's strong lobbying at the White House, in the UK government, in the EU, from companies that are trying to derive revenue directly from AI systems, that think open source AI is a bad idea because of the potential dangers. And so they are the reasons why you have those limits on computation for risks that don't exist. And they are the reasons why there are laws that may make it very difficult for small companies, academic researchers, or companies like Meta to actually open source their platforms, which is the best way to make systems safer. The reason why the infrastructure of the internet is completely open source is because open source platforms are safer. It's easier to find bugs. There's more eyeballs looking at it. They're more customizable. I mean, that's why it's very likely that your phone, more than half probability that your phone runs Linux. Every server on the web runs Linux, runs Apache on top of it to serve the web. You use your phone. It talks to a cell tower. The software stack in the cell phone tower is completely open source. Why? Because it's more reliable, because it's more customizable, because it's more democratic, because it's better economically, because you can have an entire ecosystem building on top of it. So if you have regulation that makes this illegal because of imaginary risks, you're just making the wrong choice.
Thank you. And this last question that I'm going to pose to the panel, we're going to do as a lightning round. So I'd like you to take a position, share your position, and we'll go around to close out. Do you believe there's a need for regulation beyond the existing frameworks that exist for things like privacy, medical devices, autonomous vehicles, things of that nature? And if so, do you believe that we need a new AI agency, or we should evolve our existing agencies to get to that future? Nick, would you like to start?
Sure, yeah. I think there will be a need for more. We don't want to run ahead of things and neither fall behind. Maybe it requires enough specialized competence that the new agency is needed. I would be a little concerned, though, that once you set up an agency, it has nothing else to do but to think of more reasons for why more things need to be regulated. So there's a general worry one might have about creating sort of bureaucracies who then sort of carve out more work for themselves. But I do think that as we develop more and more powerful AIs, digital minds, they start to have a bigger impact on society and move closer to this transformative level of AI, there clearly will be a need for more involvement from regulators and high-level policymakers.
Thank you, Nick. Mark?
Yes, I think we do need a regulatory framework that goes beyond sectors. And I think a good example of why is what we saw last week coming out of the UK National Cybersecurity Centre, showing that large language models are increasingly being used in cyber attacks, which cost the economy $7 billion in 2021. And I think that alone is an example to say, okay, we need to look out for what harms these systems might cause and prepare for them. I find the agency question much more difficult. I do think we need a single one to avoid what happened with the General Data Protection Regulation, where an agency was put in Dublin, or every national EU country got to regulate for that law, and all the companies headquartered in Dublin. That was a very weak regulator, and there wasn't a single enforcement ability for Europe. So I think having a central EU AI agency that the AI Act will soon create in Brussels or in Paris, I think is a really great step forward, and it allows you to bring together very rare expertise in one place.
Thank you. Francesca?
Yeah. To follow up 1 second on what was said previously, I'm going to publish a book for just the Italian market, but the title possibly will be AI Doesn't Come from Mars. And that's the same concept that we were saying. So AI is a product of our intelligence. And that means that we have some agency, some control of it. That's one side of the coin, but it also has the other side of the coin, which means that we have the responsibility to make the right decisions on how to build it. Because we can decide how to build it and how to use it, so we have to make the right decision in this thing. So that was to finish up. But very briefly, I think that a centralized AI agents versus distributed, I'm more for the distributed version, because I think that every agency should have AI skills, AI knowledge, and to be applied in the verticals that they want to focus on. Of course, there can be a centralized advisory body, and I think that's what the European Commission or the law plans to have. But I think that every agency should have AI capabilities and knowledge in that particular vertical.
Okay. And Yann?
Yeah, I don't think there is a need for a specialized agency to regulate AI. I think certainly there is regulation that makes complete sense for deployment of AI in various domains, particularly life-critical ones, and we already have those regulations in place. So what's required is more expertise on the part of regulatory agencies to figure out how to regulate the AI-powered systems in healthcare, for example, in transportation. Like, how do you thoroughly test the reliability of a self-driving car, for example, or advanced driving assistance system. And the same is true, in transportation, healthcare, and many other domains, including communication networks and everything you can think of, manufacturing, just about everything. Certainly, laws to protect privacy are really important. This is probably the best part of the EU AI Act at the moment. Things like, you can't put cameras everywhere in public places that do face recognition. That's a good idea. No question about that. Things like that are good. But let me take the analogy again of turbojet. Turbojets are heavily regulated. If you put them on a transport airplane that transports passengers, enormous amounts of regulation. Nothing wrong with that. We want safe flights. But no one, absolutely no one, is going to stop you from building a turbojet in your garage. You can do this. You can order the components. The blueprints are open. No problem. You can experiment as much as you want. You can mount it on, remotely controlled airplanes if they are not too big to be illegal, etc. There's no regulation of R&D. The regulation starts hitting if you want to put your engine on an airplane that transports people, because there it's life critical, so you want regulation. Same for drugs, same for just about everything. That's where you need regulation. Now, whether we need new regulation just because an application in those domains is powered by AI, not clear. What you do need is more expertise from the regulators, that's for sure. It was very difficult just a few years ago for people in the health regulatory agency to figure out, like, is this AI-powered medical image interpretation system, is that good or bad? Like, should I put my seal of approval on it or not? And it took years for regulators to kind of learn enough about the technology to be able to assess it. So yeah, I mean, there is a need for improvement, but I don't believe there is a need for some sort of overarching agency that would regulate the technology itself. You want to regulate products.
Thank you, everyone, for bringing your perspectives today. I'm sure that the audience is burning with questions. In lieu of time, please feel free to submit those questions on the conference platform, and our panelists will do their best to address those. And can we give a warm thank you to our esteemed panel for sharing their perspectives?